Hello and welcome again to this history podcast. And today's one is going to focus on the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. So, explicitly, what the Treaty of Versailles said. Now, just a bit of context to the actual signing. Now, the signing happened in the end of June in 1919, and for the 5 months before that, the Big Three had debated over the terms of the treaty. They crawled over huge maps of Europe, which would always be spread all over the floor, and Clemenceau and Wilson constantly quarrelled to the point where the conference was in danger of failing altogether. And at times, Lloyd George would have to step in and persuade Clemenceau and Wilson to accept each other's terms, which he did quite successfully, as eventually Clemenceau would accept the League of Nations and Wilson would accept the idea of reparations. Now, while all this debating was going on, we've got to remember there was actually 32 different countries at the Paris Peace Conference over the 5 months, different delegations. So in this picture here, which was painted years after the signing, we've got right in the middle, we've got Wilson, Clemenceau and Lloyd George. And surrounded by them is other delegations from around the world. So we have to remember that a lot of people were really interested in what was going on in Paris at the time. Thousands of people were turning up to lobby the Big Three and hoping to get a hand in something out of the final treaty. You had people coming from Palestine, from the Arab and Zionist delegations, trying to persuade the Big Three what were they going to do with Palestine. Even there's a story of Queen Mary of Romania who turned up and flirted with Wilson, and trying to get Romania some piece of land, and in the end she eventually ended up taking Transylvania. And a group of 20 Ukrainians turning up and trying to persuade the Big Three to recognise Ukraine as an independent country, even though that failed. But one thing we have to remember is that despite all these countries that you can see in this picture that were invited to the Paris Peace Conference over the first 5 months of 1919, there was one country that was completely omitted from the negotiations, and I'm just going to circle them in red here. We've got Germany. Germany were allowed in Paris, of course, but they weren't allowed to the conference. They were allowed not to have any say whatsoever. So, they were watching from the sidelines, not really knowing what was going on, and they were hoping in those 5 months that perhaps Wilson's 14 points would be put in place. There's a lot of Germans agreed with the 14 points, that no one should have an empire, no one should have an army, it would all be equal and a fair, just peace. And so in the end, they were given a text on the 7th of May 1919, and they hated it. They absolutely hated it. They were outraged, and the Germans returned home. Now, for a while, it seemed like Germany was going to reject the treaty, but eventually there were 2 Germans that were found, and they were prepared to sign it. So on the 28th of June, 1919, everyone met at the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles, which is why it's called the Treaty of Versailles. And if we look down at this picture here, we can see the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles, where all the delegations met, and the 2 German delegations were ushered in at one point, all looking very white and sheepish and intimidated, and were forced to sign. They were forced to sign the treaty, otherwise they would be invaded, which is why Germans at the time called the Treaty of Versailles the Diktat, which means in German an imposed settlement. It was something that was forced upon them. They had no say in the conference. They had to accept the terms no matter how harsh or how damning they were. So if we now look at the terms, so why did they think they were harsh? Okay, so we're just going to look at the terms, and we're going to start with this quote up here. The Allied governments affirm, and Germany accepts, the responsibility of Germany and her allies for causing all the loss and damage to which the Allied governments and their peoples have been subjected as a result of the war. Now this is from the Treaty of Versailles, and it's clause 231, and it is the war guilt clause. A lot of the clauses in the Treaty of Versailles referred to the creation of the League of Nations originally, like in the first half, but then as soon as it got into what to be done with Germany, one of the first ones was this clause 231, which is called the war guilt clause. And the war guilt clause meant that Germany had to accept blame for World War One. It was their fault, and they had to accept what had happened, and all the consequences that came from the war. Now, the best way to remember the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, in my eyes, is this word up here. It's circled in blue, and that word is brat. Now, I've mentioned words before in class, such as gargle, but I think brat may be an even easier way to remember the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. So what does brat stand for? Okay, now we've just looked at one, and that is the B, which is blame. Germany had to accept the blame for starting the war. This was vital. Okay, this was vital. They had to accept it because then they could justify the rest of the whole of the Treaty of Versailles. And this was especially vital because it provided, as it says here, the justification for Germany having to pay £6,600 million in reparations, or if in dollars, $6.6 billion in reparations. That's how much Germany had to pay, and that's what the R stands for in brat. So we've got blame, which Germany had to accept, and reparations, with the sum of 6.6 billion or £6,600 million. So what does A mean? Well, after the blame and the reparations, Germany was forbidden to have any submarines or an air force. She could only have a navy of 6 battleships and an army of just 100,000 men. So the A in brat stands for army, and the terms that came from that. So like I said, they only allowed 100,000 men. They were forbidden to have any submarines or an air force, and could only have a navy of 6 battleships. They were also, and we can't forget this, not allowed to place any of those 100,000 troops in the Rhineland, which is a strip of land just to the west of Germany on the border with France. And we're going to look at that in a minute as we find out what the T stands for in brat. So we've done B, R and A, and the T stands for territory. Germany lost a lot of territory. Now, firstly, colonies, German colonies, were given to Britain and France. Okay, so that Germany lost all of its empire abroad, and those specific colonies were given to Britain and France. Now, what other parts of land did they lose? Well, they lost Alsace-Lorraine, which is down here. This went back to France as Germany had taken it in 1871. That was returned to France. They lost Eupen and Malmedy, which was given to Belgium, this tiny bit of land here. The Saar, which I'm going to circle in red, which is inside, just next to Alsace-Lorraine, was given to the League of Nations, and France had say in it for 15 years, where they'd then eventually decide what to do with it. So they've lost so far Alsace-Lorraine and the Saar and Eupen and Malmedy to Belgium. They lost North Schleswig to Denmark. They lost this whole huge strip of land here, which is known as the Polish Corridor. It was given to Poland and Upper Silesia. The reason why they were given the Polish Corridor, Poland, is because the easy access to the sea then for Poland. and it cut off Germany from East Prussia, which I'm going to circle in red here. So as you can see, Germany was really cut down in size. And even more importantly, we shouldn't forget, is the Rhineland, which I'm going to circle in black here. The Rhineland was a huge strip of land which Germany couldn't place any of its troops there. It became a demilitarised zone. And those are the terms of the treaty. Blame, reparations, cut down of their army, and a loss of territory. An extra point that we can always reference and get extra marks for is that Germany was forbidden to unite with Austria. Not allowed to join with Austria. So they're the main terms of the Treaty of Versailles. And the best word to remember is BRAT. Blame, reparations, army, territory, and then an extra point, Germany was not allowed to join with Austria. Just remember then those key points and you'll be getting the marks. Okay, bye.